But if we want to find the most valuable thing, we need to look under our feet on the seashore for a small, stinky sea snail that gave us Tyrian purple.
Tyrian purple is named after the ancient city of Tyre in the eastern Mediterranean. The Tyrians discovered a natural fabric dye that became the most desirable luxury in the Roman world.
Tyrian purple was the most expensive commodity the Roman Empire knew. Something, in modern-day terms, the equivalent of $2,000 per gram. That meant that it was certainly not available to everyone. In fact, only the richest could afford even the smallest amount of it.
The color was coveted with a passion by the ruling classes of Rome. Clothes dyed with the color proclaimed power and wealth. The price of a single gram is $2,000, equal to the cost of almost 4 ounces of solid gold today.
Tyrian purple was such an important commodity for the Emperor Nero that, according to Suetonius, he banned anyone else from wearing it. Tyrian purple is made from a sea snail, a small mollusk that you find along the shores of the Mediterranean.
But how can a small common shellfish be so expensive? The answer lies in the complicated and time-consuming process necessary to convert the mollusk into dye.
This will give very little purple. You need 10,000, 12,000 for 1.4 gram of colorant.
The formulas and the manufacturing technology were lost for centuries.
Tyrian purple was a complex thing to make. And so the real specialists, the experts, would have kept their processes, their styles of making that color close to their hearts, a secret which they would have taken with them to the grave. And so the secret of how to make this color has been lost for many, many centuries. Too often, academics studying aspects of the ancient world will sit in the library and rely on what the texts tell them. We have to recreate the processes that they went through. And in doing that, we can understand exactly why this purple was of such value to the ancient world.
Ancient Discoveries has traveled to Provence in the south of France, one of the heartlands of the Roman Empire, to rediscover the secret of how to make the most valuable commodity in history. Inga Bosken-Canold is an artist specializing in ancient dyes and pigments. Through close study of ancient European texts and years of trial and error, she has rediscovered this mysterious and forgotten process. Inga's first step is to acquire a type of shellfish called a Murex trunculus. It is not a common seafood, but is occasionally cooked and eaten in France and Italy. It can be bought at a simple fish stall for $20 a pound. She begins the laborious task of cracking open the shells one by one. For our experiment, Inga will crush over 9 pounds of murex to dye just one small piece of wool. But where does the purple color come from? At first glance, the flesh of the murex is white in color, with no trace of purple. The answer lies in the colorless liquid secreted from a gland inside the shell that must be removed from each individual snail.
This is the hypobranchial gland, the purple veil, which will produce the color.
I cut it out with all the rest around, and I put it in a plate.
The glands Inga cuts out are initially colorless, but they react to oxygen and light, so the process of creating Tyrian purple begins. The laborious process has to be done by hand. The smallest trace of dye is so valuable that Inga puts the leftover water from the broken shells into the jar to make sure that not a milligram is wasted. After days of scraping out the shells, the result is a jar of rich, deep purple liquid.
If I dip cloth into this, the cloth will be just dirty looking and there is no stable purple on it.
Another naturally occurring chemical is needed to bind with the color and fix it to the fabric: human urine. Over the next 10 days, Inga heats the mixture in a boiler at approximately 50 degrees. She adds urine until the right alkaline level is achieved. But how would the ancients have known when the purple dye was ready?
By smelling it, by licking it, tasting it, and by looking at it. There are signs which will show that. It's all the senses which are used in order to know. They didn't need this.
Inga constantly monitors the solution for 10 days, just as the ancients did. Will she succeed in creating the dye that was used to color the robes of the wealthiest sections of society?
Purple became the color for the nouveau riche, the people, the movers and shakers who wanted to show that they were part of the top class of Roman society. It was the ancient equivalent of Gucci or Prada.
But just as Rolex and Prada have to contend with fakes today, ancient dyers were victims of counterfeiters.
As time goes on, fakes start to emerge from animal fats, from vegetables, from minerals. So real purple had to try and guard its value against the fakes of the ancient world.
How did Roman high society know they were getting the real thing? The answer once again lies in its fishy origins, and it isn't very pleasant.
The color purple wasn't just a color, it had a smell attached to it. And in fact, some of the sources describe it as one of the 4 most foul smells of the ancient world. And so we're left with a quandary. Why this most expensive, luxurious color that only emperors would wear at certain times would also have this smell that was so repulsive? But that smell, however bad it might be, was associated with the luxury of the color. And so though it may have smelt bad, it looked damn good.
Back in Provence, 10 days have passed and the vat is ready. Now Inga can discover whether she has succeeded in making the most expensive commodity yet known to man. Our wool sample must be dipped in the dye several times.
According to Pliny, you should leave it at least 5 hours. But I leave it overnight. And usually I have good results after 3 times dyeing.
To make a batch of color to dye a modest garment requires thousands of murex shells. The same piece of textile must be dipped again and again to achieve the desired shade of purple. An extraordinary number of these little sea creatures must have been sacrificed to clothe in style the most powerful and wealthy of Rome. Even by following the precise formula, there is no guarantee that we will create the right shade of purple dye we're looking for.
Once the wool is out of the active vat, it goes into water, and after about half an hour, it should be ready. Now we'll see whether the vat was active and effective. Let's see. And here we are. It is purple.
In recreating this complex manufacturing process, Ancient Discoveries has produced enough purple dye to color 2 grams of natural wool. The Romans spent a fortune on purple because it was beautiful and proclaimed wealth. Despite its foul odor, the ancients embraced it as the greatest symbol of high status. Our next discovery was also a luxury item. Originally, it was used for entertainment, a mechanical plaything. But it would initiate a technological revolution, using principles of physics that led to the development of today's jet engine. Ancient Discoveries has uncovered a groundbreaking mechanical device that was invented over 2,000 years ago. It was the first example in history of a machine that today powers our planes and takes us into space. The jet engine.
The jet engine is the symbol of the modern age because it's the principal power plant for commercial, military aviation and spacecraft.
The prototype of this technological masterpiece was invented in the 1st century AD, 2,000 years ago. It ran on steam, a power source not exploited again until the Industrial Revolution of the modern era. Our journey begins in the city of Alexandria in ancient Egypt.
Alexandria was a very special place in ancient times. It was a hotbed of activity for scientists and engineers. The sort of people that were attracted there were the great thinkers of the time.
It was a center of innovation and learning, containing the largest library of the ancient world and home to many of the greatest minds of antiquity. One of them was an engineer by the name of Heron.
Alexandria attracted men like Heron, one of the most famous engineers of ancient times.
Heron was considered the greatest experimenter of history. He was responsible for many of the most celebrated inventions of the ancient world. He laid the basis for the science of pneumatics, in other words, the action of air under pressure. He was one of the first people in Western history to understand that air was a physical substance that could be harnessed to exert a force. In one of his experiments, he designed a toy that demonstrated this insight. It was far more than a party trick. Heron had created the prototype of a machine that has changed our world today. Heron called it the heliopile, the ball of Helios, the Greek god of the wind. Following closely Heron's original drawings, ancient model maker Richard Windley has reconstructed the heliopile. The machine is powered by steam. Water is heated in a boiler, creating steam that is forced through the copper pipes that support the engine.
So what's happening now is the heat from the fire is generating the steam. The steam is coming up this tube here and coming out of each of the nozzles. Now the action of the steam projecting out of the nozzle is producing a force equal and opposite in the other direction, which is what's actually giving us the rotational force. It's a wonderfully simple but elegant device.
Elegant and simple as it is, Heron's device is the forerunner of the intricate piece of machinery that is the jet engine. How did Heron's heliopile evolve into one of the world's most powerful machines? The key is in the scientific principle which underlies both groundbreaking inventions. A principle first described by the physicist Isaac Newton in 1687. He called it his third law of motion.
Newton's third law of motion is for every reaction, there's an equal and opposite reaction.
It is this principle that underlies the physics behind jet propulsion. Heron used it to power his heliopile. In the heliopile, heat underneath the boiler causes water molecules to vibrate and expand into the gas we call steam. Expansion creates pressure. Under pressure, the steam has nowhere to go but up the pipes and out of the tiny hole in the nozzles. The force of the exhaust creates an equal and opposite reaction, which drives the nozzle forwards.
The heliopile was free to rotate, so as jet force was escaping from the sphere, then the reactant force was capable of rotating the sphere around its supports.
The same principle applies to a jet. It is an internal combustion engine powering a turbine that compresses air and forces it out of a nozzle at the back. This drives the machine forward in exactly the same way as Heron's device.
This principal mechanism is to take an air-fuel mix and accelerate that by burning it through a nozzle. And by sending that through a nozzle, we create a force or a thrust, which is the principle of jet propulsion.
The use of a jet of gas to propel an object is the same principle that applies to the modern jet engine, first designed by inventor Frank Whittle in the 1930s.
Frank Whittle was the first person to actually patent the first design jet engine.
We can only imagine what Heron of Alexandria would have felt if he knew that his invention was the forerunner of a machine that in a later age would change the world.
We take a power plant of this size, which is capable of producing lots of force, and if we attach that to the wing of an aircraft, then the reaction force from rearward will propel the aircraft forward.
The physical laws discovered by Heron over 2,000 years ago continue to inform engineers working at the forefront of jet engine technology today. Heron's heliopile remained a scientific curiosity for 2,000 years.